This woman had just lost her baby. She was heartbroken, devastated. And in that moment, her husband looked her in the eye and said, "You ruined my birthday." So she snapped. She called him a disgrace. And what happened next? Well, it shattered everything. And that's just the beginning. Because today's AITA stories are packed with betrayal, brutal honesty, and family chaos you won't believe. From cheating exes and entitled in-laws to toxic weddings and next-level petty revenge, this episode is one emotional roller coaster. Hey, what's up, guys? Welcome back to AITA Chronicles, where we break down the wildest Reddit AITA stories every single day. If you love drama, tough moral dilemmas, and some seriously messy situations, you're in the right place. Our goal? 10K subscribers, and every single one of you watching helps us get there. So hit that like button, subscribe, and let's jump right into today's chaos. Title: Am I the asshole for bringing a much older guy to Easter dinner after my dad left my mom for someone close to my age? The writer, an 18-year-old young woman, didn't just walk into adulthood. She was thrust into it. At just 15, she left home to attend boarding school abroad. Not because life was perfect, but maybe because staying in a house where loyalty was broken wasn't sustainable. Let's rewind a few years. At the age of 12, the writer's father, a 45-year-old man, shattered their family. He cheated on her mother with a woman who was only 20 years old at the time, barely older than the writer herself. And yet she had to watch as this woman, the same one her dad had chosen over their family, showed up at every family holiday gathering like she belonged. Imagine being a teenager trying to grow up while watching your father build a life with someone who could have been your classmate. That stings in ways people don't see. The woman? Clearly after his money, the writer says. But her father, either blind or willfully ignorant, was too stupid and stubborn to notice. The damage was done. And he paraded that damage around like everything was fine. So this Easter, the writer returned home. But she wasn't coming empty-handed. She brought a guest, a friend, a 38-year-old man. But more importantly, he was kind, thoughtful, and had been there for her when others hadn't. He was recently divorced, would have spent Easter alone, and she invited him to come home with her just for a few days, pretending to be her boyfriend. Yes, pretending. Because this wasn't about romance, it was about making a statement, about holding up a mirror. And oh, that mirror must have hurt. Because after dinner, her dad pulled her aside, clearly uncomfortable. He said the situation made him uneasy. And the writer? She met his discomfort with unapologetic truth. "I didn't do anything wrong. After you, I've learned, love has no age." That line hits different when it's served ice cold. Her dad told her she ruined Easter for everyone, that she was selfish. But was it selfishness or a taste of his own medicine? After flying back to school, the fallout came. Family members reached out. Messages flooded in. They told her to apologize, to break up with her boyfriend. But this wasn't about love or relationships. This was about power, about control. And for the first time, the writer had the upper hand. She stood her ground. She hadn't responded to the messages, not because she was arrogant, but because she didn't feel she was in the wrong. This wasn't just petty revenge. It was a long overdue reversal of roles. Her dad had made her life uncomfortable for years, and now he got a taste. Now, in the edit, the writer clarifies a few things. Some thought the story was fake, but she insists she met her friend through a book club after moving from Europe to the US. He became a father figure to her. He bought her dinner when she had no friends. He spent time with her when no one else did. And this Easter, he didn't just accompany her, he stood beside her. Sure, she admits it was immature, she knows. This wasn't her most graceful moment, but sometimes when adults refuse to be the grown-ups, the kids grow up hard and fast. She ends with a little jab of humor. "Thanks for the advice, everyone. I'll update for Christmas, lol." But under that laugh is a truth we can't ignore. This wasn't just about Easter dinner. It was about a daughter demanding to be seen, to be heard, and for just one moment to show her father how it felt to be replaced. So, am I the asshole? Some might say yes. Others, a resounding no. But at the end of the day, what the writer did wasn't about morality, it was about emotion, about pain, about trying in the only way she could to reclaim a little piece of herself. And maybe that's not nice, but it is human. Title, Am I the Asshole for Refusing to Make My Sister-in-Law's Wedding Cake for Free? The writer is a 29-year-old woman with something many people only dream of. A business born out of pure passion. What started as a college hobby has grown into a full-fledged bakery. Not just frosting and sprinkles, but late nights, client calls, custom orders, stress, tears, deadlines, and everything in between. This isn't just cake, it's a career, a craft, a livelihood. Now, her sister-in-law, a 33-year-old bride-to-be, is getting married in June. And while the writer and her sister-in-law have been on polite, friendly enough terms, there's always been something subtle in the air. That undercurrent, that patronizing smirk, the offhanded comments like, must be nice playing in the kitchen all day, or you're lucky people pay for stuff they could just learn on YouTube, death by 1,000 little digs, wrapped in a smile. Still, the writer kept the peace. Bit her tongue. Family, right? So when her sister-in-law asked her to make the wedding cake, the writer said yes. Why not? Until the details came in. Not just any cake, a 4-tiered, elegant creation with smooth buttercream, delicate floral piping, and real flowers cascading from top to bottom. A chocolate sponge with raspberry filling. And not only that, she wanted the writer to personally deliver it the morning of the wedding. If you've ever worked in events, you know what that means. An early start, tense delivery, and the pressure of transporting edible artwork that could collapse at a single hard turn. Still, the writer agreed. She ran the numbers, offered a very generous family discount, and sent over a quote. And that's when the silence broke. Wait, you're charging me? Her sister-in-law said, completely caught off guard. To her, it wasn't a business transaction. It was supposed to be a gift, a wedding present, one the writer never actually offered. And when the writer politely explained that she usually doesn't gift wedding cakes because of the time, labor, and materials involved, but that she'd be happy to buy something from the registry instead, her sister-in-law hung up. Just like that. No gratitude, no consideration for the effort behind the offer. Just a bitter jab. You're being transactional. It's just a cake. Just a cake. The words that cut deeper than icing on a knife. Let's pause for a second. This isn't just about cake. This is about respect. About labor, about women in creative industries being dismissed like what they do is a hobby, no matter how hard they work. The writer has given away cakes before, for grieving friends, for birthdays, for people going through hard times. But this wasn't that. The sister-in-law and her fiancé could absolutely afford a custom wedding cake. What they couldn't afford, apparently, was to treat the writer like a professional. But the story doesn't end there. Now, the writer finds herself at the center of a quiet family storm. The sister-in-law is spinning the story, painting the writer as cold-hearted and opportunistic, trying to profit off her happiness. She's telling everyone, friends, family, anyone who will listen. And then comes the call from her mother-in-law. Not to understand, not to ask what happened. No, the call was drenched in stress and damage control, all about stopping a bigger family fight. Not because the sister-in-law was right, but because it's easier to ask the writer to fold than it is to confront the bride-to-be. Even the writer's wife, who's completely on her side, admitted something painful. She kinda wishes the writer just said yes to avoid the fallout. That's the part that really hits, when even the people closest to you are tired of the fight, not because you're wrong, but because you're the one expected to keep the peace. So, am I the asshole? That's the question, isn't it? Is the writer the asshole for saying no to unpaid labor, for valuing her own time, for daring to expect respect in an industry people constantly belittle as just cake? Or is the real issue that people, especially family, sometimes only value you when you're giving something away? This isn't a tale of sugar and flour. This is about boundaries, about how the people closest to us can sometimes be the ones who disrespect our work the most. And let's not pretend this is about money. It's about principle. Title, Am I the Asshole for Not Paying for My Son's Second Wedding? Let's set the scene. A father, standing at the crossroads of fairness and family expectation, trying to balance what feels just with what is emotionally demanded of him. The writer and his wife have 2 sons, 2 lives he's helped shape, raise, guide, and when it came time for them to take the next step in life, marriage, he didn't hesitate to support them. not just with love and guidance, but financially too. For his youngest son's first wedding, he gave $10,000. A generous, meaningful gesture that helped launch a milestone moment. Then came the eldest's turn, 5 years later. And here, the writer adjusted for time, inflation, and the rising cost of modern weddings. He gave his oldest $30,000, not out of favoritism, but logic. Fairness, adapted to the times. $10,000 5 years ago simply didn't stretch the same way anymore. The intention was simple and clear, to treat both sons equitably in the context of their own moment in time. And if we're being honest, that's not just fairness, it's thoughtfulness. But now, the past resurfaces. The youngest son, newly divorced, is preparing to marry again. And with this new engagement comes an unexpected demand. He wants the writer to pay for his second wedding. Not a contribution, not a loan, but full financial support again. And this time, the writer draws the line. One wedding. That's the support he offered both sons. One major celebration per child. Beyond that, it's adulthood, personal responsibility, a place where the parental wallet gently closes and the grown-up world begins. But to his youngest son, that decision was betrayal, an insult, a message, he believes, that his parents no longer support him, that he's less loved. The accusation came swift. You're being unfair, you're treating me differently. To which the writer calmly responds, we're not. We supported your first wedding, just like your brothers, but a second wedding is your own responsibility. We believe in supporting your life, not funding every chapter of it. Let's pause for a moment here, because this isn't really about money. It's about expectation. It's about how easily love and generosity can be misread, and how often financial support in families comes with invisible strings of resentment and entitlement. The writer isn't punishing his son. He's drawing a boundary, and this is where the emotional layer deepens. The writer isn't cold. He's not stingy. He gave, and he gave generously to both sons, but now he's being told that wasn't enough, that past generosity obligates him indefinitely. And here's the thing, when does it stop? If he pays for this second wedding, what happens if there's a third, or a vow renewal in 10 years, or a destination anniversary party? This is where so many parents find themselves caught, somewhere between love and enabling, between helping and being taken for granted. The writer makes his stance clear. If you can't afford your own wedding, maybe you're not ready for one. A harsh truth? Maybe. But it's not wrong. Marriage isn't just about a day. It's about a life. Shared finances, planning, compromise. If you're relying on your parents to bankroll the celebration, are you truly ready for everything that comes after the cake is cut? So, am I the asshole? That's what the writer asks, not out of arrogance, but out of confusion. Because despite his years of effort, his fairness, his logic, he's now labeled the villain. The truth? No one wants to be the bad guy in their own family. But sometimes the person who says no isn't the villain. They're just the one strong enough to say what everyone else won't. This isn't a story about weddings. It's about boundaries, about when support becomes expectation, and about how even the fairest of parents can end up painted as selfish for simply saying, that's enough. Title: Am I the asshole for doing nothing while my brother gets jumped after school? Sometimes the hardest stories to tell are the ones that don't come with clean answers. No good guy, no villain in a cape, just messy, painful reality, and the kind of silence that comes from years of being ignored. The writer is 17, old enough to understand the weight of consequence, but still young enough to live under a roof where the rules aren't entirely his own. His younger brother, 15, is being jumped, beaten up every day after school. Not just teased, not shoved in the hall. We're talking black eyes, bloody lips, bruises across his body like a map of every wrong he's ever committed. But here's the part that most people don't want to hear. He's not innocent. Because long before the fists started flying, this boy, the writer's brother, was the storm in someone else's sky. He wasn't just a bully. He was calculated, cruel, manipulative. He stalked, harassed, and humiliated classmates. He told other kids to kill themselves, laughed while doing it, targeted vulnerable students, and worst of all, he knew exactly what he was doing. At 8 years old, he had already started building a reputation that made people flinch when they heard his name. And at 10, he was wielding emotional abuse like a weapon sharper than any knife. In remote learning, he found cover, a shadow to hide in. And even when the classrooms reopened, his behavior evolved, escalated. He removed his mask in the middle of a pandemic, breathing intentionally on classmates. He sneezed on a child whose sibling was immunocompromised and told him flat out, "I'll kill your sibling if you come near me." Let that sit. The writer tried. He confronted his brother, called it out, told him he was sick, twisted. He warned him that one day this cruelty would catch up to him, that pain doesn't vanish, it circles back. But nothing changed. Why? Because his parents did nothing. They knew. They saw. Teachers called. Other parents reached out. Still, they refused to listen. They didn't want to know who their son really was. They wanted to believe he was misunderstood, that people were just picking on him. And now? It's too late. Now it's fists and fury. Now it's retribution. A group of seniors, whose younger siblings were once the targets of the brother's abuse, have taken justice into their own hands. Every day after school they wait, and every day the brother walks home with fresh wounds. It's not right, it's not legal. But is it unjust? That's the painful question sitting in the writer's chest. The one twisting the knife when his parents come to him, begging him to intervene, begging him to step in, protect the boy who's done nothing but torment others. They call the writer heartless, cold, a failure of a brother. But here's the twist. Maybe he's the only one in that house who has a conscience. Maybe he's the only one who stood up and said, "This is wrong." When he was younger, he tried to be a good brother, tried to steer his sibling back towards something decent. But at some point, when no one else cared, he stopped trying. And maybe that was survival. Maybe that was self-preservation. His parents ask, "Why don't you protect him?" And the writer, in one of the most hauntingly honest moments of this entire story, replies, "Did you ever consider those other boys are big brothers too? Protecting their little brothers the way you never protected me or anyone else." That's the gut punch. Because it's not just about a fight behind the school. It's about years of silence, years of inaction, years of pretending cruelty doesn't exist if you just don't look it in the eyes. The writer isn't passive. He's just done. And that doesn't make him evil. It makes him real. So, is the writer the asshole? Or is he just the first person in this story to stop pretending that love means excusing abuse? That family means shielding someone from the consequences of their own darkness? Because maybe, just maybe, the real failure wasn't the writer not stepping in. It was the parents who never did. Title, Am I the Asshole for Laughing in My Ex's Face and Telling Her Off About Her Relationship? There are moments in life that feel so surreal, so absurd, that all you can do is laugh, not because it's funny, but because it's the only reaction left when the hypocrisy becomes too loud to ignore. That's where we find the writer, a 40-year-old father who's just trying to raise his teenage daughter in peace and navigate co-parenting with a woman who betrayed him a decade ago. The betrayal? Cheating. Not a one-time slip, not a gray area, a full-on, undeniable, stab-in-the-back betrayal that shattered a marriage when their daughter Annie was just 6 years old. It's been 10 years, a whole decade of joint custody, of birthdays shared across 2 households, of pickups and drop-offs, and pretending everything's fine for the sake of their child. And now Annie is 16. And for the past 3 years, she's been in a steady relationship with a boy named Louis. Now let's pause here for a second, because this isn't just any teen romance. Louis isn't some forgettable high school fling. According to the writer, this boy treats his daughter like a princess, respectful, kind, loyal, the kind of boy every father secretly hopes their daughter falls for. And then, chaos. The storm arrives not from the teenagers, but from the adults who should know better. You see, Louis' stepdad cheated on his mom. That's terrible enough, but it doesn't stop there. He cheated with the writer's ex. Yes, the same woman who once shattered her own family has now done it again, and wants everyone else to adjust around her wreckage. But it gets even more absurd. She's not just continuing the affair. She's demanding her daughter end her relationship with Louis, the boy she's loved for 3 years, the boy who has never wronged anyone, And for what? So the ex can date the father of her daughter's boyfriend? It's twisted, messy, a plotline out of a bad soap opera. She tells Annie she can't see Louis anymore, bans him from her house, then has the audacity to go to his mother, a woman she's just betrayed, and demands she force her own son to break up with Annie. And how does Louis's mother respond? Like a queen. She flips her off and delivers the line of the century. I don't care about you or him. I'm not going to ruin my son's 3-year relationship for two people who can't even keep a relationship. Mic drop. Now comes the moment that broke the internet, or at least the writer's last shred of patience. His ex comes to him boldly and says, "People need to respect me and my relationship." And the writer, he laughs. He laughs in her face. And then calmly, unapologetically tells her, "You can't expect people to respect your relationship when you aren't even respecting theirs." That line, it's truth, raw, unfiltered truth, and sometimes the truth stings more than anything. But of course, here come the flying monkeys. Her relatives rush in, calling the writer an asshole. They say Annie is young, that she'll get more guys, that it's not the end of the world if this relationship ends. But here's the thing they're missing. This isn't about puppy love anymore. This is about respect, autonomy, boundaries. It's about not punishing two innocent teenagers for the selfish actions of adults who should have known better. So, is the writer the asshole? Let's be real here. Absolutely not. He's the only adult in this situation who seems to care about Annie's well-being. He isn't trying to destroy anything. He isn't meddling. He's simply refusing to coddle someone who bulldozes other people's lives and then demands applause. He laughed not because it was funny, but because the hypocrisy was unbearable. And maybe that laugh was the only weapon he had left to fight back with. So no, the writer is not the asshole. He's a father watching his daughter get caught in the fallout of someone else's mess and doing his best to stand his ground. And if the price for that is a little laughter at a hypocrite's expense, then frankly, it's a bargain. Title: Am I the asshole for telling my ex's new boyfriend she cheated on me with 2 guys while we were together? Let's rewind time for a second. Picture it. The beginning of love, the start of something that feels solid, permanent, full of promise. That's where the writer, a 25-year-old man, once stood, living the early chapters of what he believed was a long-haul love story. He and his then-girlfriend, whom we'll call Kay, were doing all the right things, sharing space, pooling finances, building what most would call the domestic starter pack. It wasn't just dating, it was a life together. And then came the trip. Yes, the classic girls' trip to Tulum. The moment where so many seemingly healthy relationships hit an invisible fork in the road. When Kay returned from that trip, she looked different. Not physically, but in a way that's hard to describe unless you've been there. As the writer puts it, she looked like she'd seen the ghost of morality. She sat him down, said she needed to be honest. And then it came out. Not one mistake, not one poor choice in a moment of weakness. 2 affairs. One with a man from her yoga class, someone she once described as like a brother, and another with a stranger on the beach, someone she connected with under the moonlight. Now, I don't know about you, but when someone cheats and then packages it like a poetic experience, it's a level of emotional gaslighting that just hits different. The writer did what many wouldn't have the strength to do. He walked away immediately. No begging. No second chances. He moved out the very next day, blocked her, entered what he calls monk mode. But of course, life has a way of circling back, and a few months later, his inbox lights up. It's a message from someone named Zach, Kay's new boyfriend. And what does Zach want? He wants truth. He writes respectfully, asking whether Kay had been faithful in their relationship, says she told him the writer had been emotionally distant, that he'd checked out. First thought? LOL. Because nothing like rewriting history to make yourself look like the one who was abandoned. But the writer doesn't immediately respond. He thinks about it, sits with it, because even in the face of betrayal, he's not out for revenge. Eventually he replies, calm, measured, no venom, just facts. She cheated on me twice, once with someone she told me not to worry about, and once with a random on vacation. You can believe what you want, but that's what happened. Good luck. No name calling, no drama, just the truth. Zach doesn't respond, but Kate does. And oh boy, here comes the guilt trip. Suddenly, the writer is the villain in her carefully curated healing journey. She sends him a text. I can't believe you're still trying to ruin my life. That was so inappropriate. I thought you were better than this. Pause. Right here. Because this is where the story turns. Not into an argument about morality, but about control. Here we have a woman who cheated twice, lied, took something stable and loving and burned it to the ground. And now, months later, she wants to dictate how the writer handles his own experience. She didn't ask him to lie, she expected him to. And that's where the true audacity lies. So is the writer the asshole? Let's strip it back. A man got hurt. Deeply. He removed himself with dignity. He didn't start rumors. He didn't go scorched earth. And when asked directly for honesty by someone potentially walking the same path he once did, he gave it. No embellishments, no smear campaign, just the truth. And the truth, well, it tends to hit hardest when someone's built their new life on a lie. So no, the writer is not the asshole. In fact, he's the only one in this whole situation who's acting with clarity and self-respect. And if that shakes her new relationship, maybe it was already hanging by a thread. Some truths are inconvenient, some feel uncomfortable, but they're still truths. And this one, it needed to be said. Title update. Am I the asshole for calling my husband a disgrace after he said my miscarriage ruined his birthday? Before we dive into this emotional update, here's a quick recap of the original post, just in case you're new here or need a refresher. The writer, a 26-year-old woman, went through an incredibly painful miscarriage on the same day as her husband's 27th birthday. Despite her emotional and physical suffering, her husband was distant, dismissive, and even cold, stopping for beers on the way home and later muttering that her miscarriage had ruined his birthday. When the writer called him a disgrace for his behavior, he locked her out of the bedroom and had his mother call to scold her. It was raw, it was painful, and it sparked a wave of support and concern in the community. If you want to hear the full story, be sure to watch my previous video, link in the description. Now, let's talk about the update, because a lot has changed and not all of it is easy to hear. The writer begins by clarifying something important. What happened in that moment wasn't typical of her husband, at least not in the way most people would assume. She tells us he's usually supportive, a good dad, and not the kind of man to explode like that. And maybe that's what made the pain so much worse. But when the one person you expect to lean on in your darkest hour suddenly becomes the source of that darkness, it's a betrayal that goes beyond words. She even reminds us of an earlier red flag, one she hadn't mentioned before. A moment when she assembled an accent chair by herself, and instead of praise or gratitude, he jumped on it until it broke, just to prove she'd done it wrong. That moment, brushed off as stress-fueled and resolved through therapy, now feels like the quiet warning siren nobody heard. 7 years together, her first partner, a man her family welcomed with open arms. And still, here we are. The writer doesn't deny that her husband acted like an asshole. She knows he did. What she was grappling with was whether she went too far by calling him a disgrace. That one word, it haunted her. Not because it wasn't true, but because she questioned whether she had the right to say it. Whether his grief, his birthday, his stress somehow outweighed her pain, her physical trauma, her loss. But here's the thing. Grief doesn't give someone permission to be cruel. Stress doesn't justify silence or neglect or making your wife feel like an inconvenience on the day she lost your child. The outpouring from the community helped her realize that. And then, the shift. She had a scan. Physically, she's healing. Her tonsillitis cleared up. Her strength started returning. And with that strength came a decision. She left. She packed up, took her son, moved in with family, somewhere safe. And when she told her husband, he didn't cry, he didn't beg, he didn't reflect. He raged, tried to stop her, put hands on her, threatened to take his own life. Let that sink in, because there's a level of emotional immaturity, of danger, that gets exposed when someone is losing control. And that's what this was about. Not love, not grief, control. Thankfully, her mother intervened. The writer and her child are now in a safer place, physically and emotionally. She's on leave from work, taking time to grieve, reflect, and slowly figure out what comes next. She ends her update with quiet gratitude to the strangers who messaged, the people who commented, the ones who reminded her she wasn't alone, that her pain wasn't invisible, and that her voice, however shaken, still mattered. She doesn't expect there'll be another update after this, but even if there isn't, this last one speaks volumes. Final thoughts? This wasn't just a story about a miscarriage or a ruined birthday. It was about a woman discovering her breaking point and then choosing not to break. Was she the asshole for calling him a disgrace? Absolutely not. If anything, she was restrained. That one word, disgrace, might have been the first time she allowed herself to name what she was experiencing, and sometimes that's where healing begins. Let me know what you think down in the comments. Has anyone else experienced something similar? And if you're going through something right now, know this: you are not alone. Stay safe, stay kind, and take care of yourselves out there. Update. My daughter's dance teacher invited her to a sleepover at her house. Am I the asshole for formally complaining? Before we dive into the update, here's a quick recap for those just tuning in. A concerned mom, our writer, shared that her 7-year-old daughter's ballet teacher had invited the entire class to a sleepover at her home. The kicker? No parents were informed directly. The invitation came through the kids, and no additional details were shared. The writer had never met the teacher outside of brief post-class chats and understandably felt uneasy about the whole thing. She wondered if she'd be wrong to report it to the school. If you want the full original story, watch my previous video, link is in the description. Now, let's get into the update. And wow, it takes a few turns. The writer wastes no time. She opens with a bold, almost resigned tone. If you've already pegged her as some kind of true crime-obsessed Karen with social anxiety issues, then fine. This isn't about changing minds. This is about protecting her kid. And honestly, you can feel that exhausted determination in every word. She acknowledges the difference between this situation and something like a school-sponsored lock-in. Those events have structure, oversight, communication. This was a vague, off-the-books sleepover at a teacher's private home with no prior communication to parents. Just a few promises of McDonald's and movies whispered to 7-year-old girls. Still, the writer didn't jump straight to lighting torches and storming the school office. She and her husband agreed to speak directly with the teacher first. A reasonable, calm approach. Her husband handled the conversation during pickup, and while the talk seemed civil, what he learned only deepened the concern. The teacher's intentions, at first glance, didn't seem malicious. She thought a sleepover would be fun, a way to bond with the girls. But there were some unsettling oversights that just can't be ignored. She hadn't considered getting emergency contact info. She hadn't thought to include another parent as a chaperone because, well, her husband would be there, his first ever mention. And when told the writer's daughter was anxious, instead of offering understanding, the teacher encouraged pushing the child out of her comfort zone. That last part hits hard. There's a fine line between encouragement and dismissal. And for a child who's not ready, that kind of pressure can feel more like a shove than a nudge. After processing everything, the writer decided to send an email to the school. Not a dramatic, finger-pointing accusation, just a heads up that a sleepover was being planned with very little transparency. 2 days later, the teacher canceled the event. She cited a complaint and offered an apology to the parents. The girls, understandably disappointed, may still get their night of fun. Some of the moms are planning a separate sleepover themselves, one that's open and parent-led. Now here's the real emotional core of this update. The writer doesn't regret what she did. Not even a little. She explains it perfectly. She'd rather be paranoid and wrong than silent and regretful. If it had all turned out fine, she'd be embarrassed. Sure, maybe even laugh about it one day. But if something had gone wrong, if she'd ignored her gut and it cost her child or someone else's child their safety, that's a weight no parent should ever have to carry. There's something incredibly honest about that. This wasn't about suspicion or control or being one of those moms. This was about taking a stand before something felt off. And in a world where red flags are too often dismissed until it's too late, maybe a little caution isn't such a bad thing. The writer closes by thanking everyone and saying she likely won't update again. She's said her piece, she's done what she felt was right, and her daughter is safe. That's what matters most. This update, it wasn't explosive. There was no scandal, no shocking twist, but that's what makes it real. It's the quiet, behind-the-scenes tension that so many parents wrestle with every single day. And this time, the writer chose her daughter's well-being over social approval or avoiding awkward conversations. And honestly, that's a win. Am I the asshole for sticking with my son when my fiancé unfairly punished him? Sometimes, being a parent isn't about being perfect. It's not about pleasing everyone or keeping things smooth on the surface. No, it's about standing firm, especially when your child is being treated unfairly, even if it means losing people you love in the process. The writer, a 38-year-old father, has a 9-year-old son and an 8-year-old stepson, his fiancé's child. From the outside, it might seem like any blended family. 2 kids close in age, 1 home, 1 future. But in this home, cracks had started to form, and those cracks were growing deeper by the day. The writer's fiancée, 32, had made it clear. She didn't think highly of his son's behavior. She regularly told the writer that his son acted bratty, rude, and nasty when he wasn't around. But here's where it gets important. Instead of jumping to conclusions, the writer always gave his son the space to speak his truth. And that's not always easy when you're constantly hearing a different version of events from someone you love. Now, the writer doesn't pretend his son is perfect. In fact, he admits that his son struggles to get along with loud, teasing kids, the kind who push and poke until someone snaps. And unfortunately, the stepson, he thrives on teasing. He knows how to push buttons and keep pushing until things spiral. And yes, the writer's son has snapped before, but he's also been held accountable, punished when needed. The important part? So has the stepson, because fairness matters to the writer. Boundaries matter. But his fiancée? She didn't see it that way. In her eyes, the writer's son was the problem. He can dish it out, but can't take it, she would say. And the writer, knowing his son, knew that wasn't true. His son only teased back when provoked, confused about whether others were joking or actually trying to hurt him. Either way, he hated it. He didn't want to be part of that cycle. And then came last Saturday. The writer comes home from work and immediately senses something's wrong. His son is in his room, punished. His stepson, relaxing in the living room, gaming away on the PS5 like nothing happened. The writer asks what's going on, and that's when the dam breaks. His son, just 9 years old, breaks down in tears. Now let's pause for a second. Imagine this moment. A little boy, already unsure how to fit in, feeling singled out again, and not even understanding what he did wrong. That's not just punishment. That's isolation. The fiancé claimed the boy had been rude to kids and adults at a party earlier in the day because he lost a game. And it's like when the writer sat down with his son, a very different story came to light. The boy had tried to avoid the crowd. He knew who was going to tease him. He knew the adults weren't going to step in, not for him. He said if he made fun of someone, the fiancé would be on his ass immediately. But when it was done to him, silence, laughter, maybe even encouragement. And it didn't stop there. She limited how much of his favorite food he could eat. She wouldn't let him play games. But her son could do whatever he wanted. Then came the board game. According to the boy, he was roped into playing. He lost and suspected they cheated. But instead of flipping out like he might have in the past, he got up. He walked away. He went into another room. He wanted to protect himself, protect everyone else from the reaction they were probably waiting for. The one they could point to and see, he's the problem. He didn't give them that. He walked away. Now tell me, is that not growth? Is that not restraint? So what did the writer do? He did what any good parent should do when their child has been hurt, humiliated, and shut out for trying to do the right thing. He took his son out to Sonic, to insomnia cookies, something small but filled with intention, a moment of comfort in a day that had been anything but. And he told his son, "You didn't do anything wrong." That moment, that's what this story is really about. Not long after they came home, the writer walked into another storm. His fiancée was packing her bags, grabbing her son, and heading to her mother's place. Her final words? She couldn't live with a spoiled brat anymore, and she was done if the writer wasn't going to hold him accountable. But here's the thing. He was holding him accountable. He just wasn't going to punish a child for choosing peace. And now, a week later, the writer and his son are home, quieter, lighter. His son is happy for the first time in a long time. But the writer is left holding the question, was I wrong? Did I just blow up my relationship because I chose my son? So am I the asshole for sticking with my son? Let's talk about that. Because when someone shows you that they're willing to walk out on a child over a single act of protection and empathy, they're showing you who they truly are. The writer didn't spoil his son. He saw him. And while that may have cost him a fiancée, it gave his son something far more powerful, a father who refused to abandon him when it mattered most. And that's not being an asshole. That's being a damn good dad. Am I the asshole for not attending my friend's child-free wedding, even though she offered a solution? There are certain decisions in life that don't come with fanfare. No applause, no validation, just quiet resolve. The kind that weighs heavy on your chest because it's rooted in love, in responsibility, and in sacrifice. The writer knows that feeling all too well. She's a single mother. Her son, just 9 months old. A baby by every definition, but one whose reality is far more complicated than most. He has a tracheostomy, a small tube in his neck that helps him breathe. And if you've never cared for someone with one, know this. It's not just wiping noses and warming bottles. It's suctioning airways before they clog. It's listening for alarms in the middle of the night. It's constant alertness. It's life or death in real time. And the writer, she's doing this alone. So when her friend, someone she cared about, announced a child-free wedding, the writer didn't argue. She understood. Some people want an elegant, uninterrupted celebration. That's fine. She RSVP'd no from the start. It wasn't out of bitterness. It wasn't even sadness. It was acceptance. She simply didn't have anyone in her city trained to care for her son. Not a babysitter, not a backup. Her mother, her only support, lived too far away. And that should have been the end of it. But it wasn't. Her friend, who suddenly found herself down a few bridesmaids, came back asking the writer to step in and join the bridal party. Which, let's just pause here. You already knew she couldn't attend, and now you're asking her to be in the wedding? That's not thoughtfulness. That's convenience dressed up as sentiment. Still, the writer declined again, politely, respectfully. She explained once more that her situation hadn't changed. Her baby's medical needs don't disappear because someone else needs help filling a dress. But it didn't stop there. Her friend suggested that the writer hire someone to stay in a hotel room nearby with her son during the wedding, overnight, which for any other child might be an expensive ask. For the writer, it's practically impossible. You can't just scroll Yelp for someone who can manage a trach tube. This is specialized care, and even if she could find someone on short notice, the cost would be crushing. Then came the most baffling suggestion yet. Her friend offered a solution, that the writer leave her medically fragile infant with a stranger, the woman who would be watching her own son during the wedding. 2 kids, 1 adult, one of them with emergency medical needs. And if that wasn't enough, the writer was expected to leave the reception every so often, back and forth like a ping pong ball, bouncing between a room where her baby's safety might be in jeopardy and a celebration she could never actually be present for. At some point, it stopped being about a wedding and started being about pressure, guilt, manipulation under the guise of, we just want you there. The writer finally drew a line. She told her friend again, she can't come. And now the friend is upset, hurt, claiming the writer is making excuses, saying she just wants her there because she's like an older sister, which is rich considering everything she's ignored about what the writer is going through. So here's the question we're left with. Is the writer the asshole for standing by her child's safety even when someone she cares about is disappointed? Let's be real. There are moments in friendship where you show grace, and there are moments when you ask for it. This should have been one of those moments where the friend said, I get it. Take care of your baby. We'll celebrate together another time. Instead, it became a litany of half solutions and guilt trips, each one more out of touch than the last. And the most frustrating part, the writer didn't lash out. She didn't ghost. She didn't make a scene. She explained. She apologized. She tried. But some people don't want understanding. They want compliance. And when they don't get it, they call it selfishness. The truth, what the writer did wasn't selfish. It was selfless. It was brave. It was necessary. Because when you're the only person standing between your child and danger, you stand tall. You say no. And if someone can't understand that, if they can't see that this isn't about skipping a party, it's about survival, then maybe their definition of sister love isn't as deep as they think it is. So no, the writer is not the asshole. She's a mother. A fierce, tired, unwavering mother who did exactly what she was supposed to do. And that's something worth respecting, not questioning. Am I the asshole for not wanting my younger brother and his wife living with us if they have a baby? Sometimes standing up for your peace doesn't look graceful. It doesn't feel noble. It feels loud, messy, even selfish, especially when it involves family. But underneath the noise is often a truth that's been quietly simmering. And the writer? She's finally had enough of keeping it bottled in. She's 27, newly married. She and her husband just bought their first home, a milestone that should be soaked in joy and plans for the future. And those plans include trying again for a baby after the heartbreak of losing one just 5 months ago. That's not a footnote. That's a wound still healing. It lingers, silently, in every room she walks through. Then comes her younger brother, B-Bye, and his wife, A. They've hit hard times. Money is tight, life has cornered them a bit, and now they're asking the writer and her husband if they can move into the basement bedroom. And in a gesture of grace, the writer says yes. She agrees to open her home, not just her space, but her peace. But what starts as a plan to help families slowly spirals into something far more complicated. Her other brother announces a pregnancy with his girlfriend, and suddenly, BB and A are in what can only be described as a self-imposed fertility race. It's not about joy or stability. It's about beating the clock, being next. And they make sure everyone knows. Every family dinner, every gathering, they're casually dropping baby bombs like it's some kind of competition. Meanwhile, the writer watches this unfold in disbelief. These two can't even afford their current rent. They're asking for charity in the form of basement rent, but that they're trying to bring a new life into the world. In her home, she tries to set boundaries. She expresses her concerns. She tells them outright, if they get pregnant, they cannot live with her. Not because she's cold, not because she doesn't care, but because she is not willing to become the unwilling host to someone else's chaos when she's still trying to rebuild her own sense of stability. And yeah, she wants the first baby in her home to be hers. And that's not evil, that's human. At Easter dinner, A brings up babies again, and this time the writer doesn't sugarcoat anything. She says it plain. It's a bad idea. She's not going to support them financially or emotionally if they have a child while living in her home. A cries. The family reacts. The accusations start flying. You're overstepping. You're always so bossy. You need to support them or get out of their lives. And the writer starts to wonder, am I really the villain here? Let's pause for a second. This isn't a story about someone playing gatekeeper with someone else's choices. This is about a woman protecting her space, her future, and her grief. It's about someone who's been through the worst kind of heartbreak and is desperately trying to build a sanctuary around the hope that's left. The writer's home is more than just square footage. It's supposed to be the place where her life gets quiet again, where she and her husband can try, hope, heal. It's not a crash pad for two adults playing house with no plan, no finances, and no boundaries. And then the update hits. Her husband, after a tense family dinner, tells her he spoke to A, said she was undecided. That one word, undecided, was twisted into, you're bullying us. BB storms outside, demands an apology, and all hell breaks loose. And here's where things start falling apart fast. BB and A haven't just asked for help. They've been disrespecting the writer's home. Paint splattered everywhere from their DIY project, tools left outside, a paint sprayer in the fridge. Her dogs, her family, stressed and unsettled because A's dog is aggressive. At this point, it's not about the baby. It's about the blatant disregard for space, for respect, for her. So the writer and her husband sit down, write a message, and send it off. I love you, but I can't do this. You can choose to have a child. That's your business, but bringing that child into my house is mine. It's a hard message. It's not easy to say, but it's clear and it's fair, and frankly, it's long overdue. And when BB doesn't respond, silence speaks louder than shouting ever could. Later that night, her dad calls. Apparently, BB gave him a watered-down version of the story. When the truth comes out that they wanted to move in, even he agrees. That's not sustainable. That's not right. So, is the writer the asshole for saying no to housing her brother and his wife if they have a baby? Absolutely not. Because protecting your peace isn't cruelty, it's survival. Because being honest doesn't make you a villain, it makes you someone who finally said the quiet thing out loud. Because wanting the first cries of a baby in your home to come from your child isn't selfish, it's sacred. The writer didn't slam a door in their face. She simply said, "Not this door, not this time." And that's okay. Am I the asshole for calling off my wedding because my fiancée wants to invite guys she had a gangbang with? Sometimes, a wedding isn't just the celebration of love. It becomes the magnifying glass that shows you every crack, every red flag, every unspoken boundary that got quietly ignored along the way. The writer was deep in the trenches of wedding planning, guest lists, venues, decisions that sure are stressful but are supposed to feel like shared joy, like building the first chapter of forever. His fiancée had her list of people she wanted to invite, and in the beginning, everything seemed fine. No alarms, no gut feelings screaming at him, just a list. But life has a twisted way of revealing the truth in whispers through people who were never supposed to speak. In this case, it came from a boyfriend of her friend, someone not even central to the story, who just happened to know too much. He pulled the writer aside and casually dropped a nuclear bomb into what should have been a peaceful moment. You know 5 of the guys on that list? They're from college. She had group sex with them a few times. And then the kicker, as if this was all just bar talk. If I were you, I'd want to know. Also, you owe me like 20 beers. That's how it landed. Just boom. No warning, no context, no soft entry into the chaos. Just a truth too big to ignore. Now, let's make something very clear, because the writer sure did. He is not mad that his fiancée had a past, not judging her for her choices. He repeats it loudly because the internet is always quick to miss the point. It's not the gangbang. It's not about what she did in college, who she did it with, or how wild things got. College is a different world. People make choices, explore, experiment. That's life. That's being young. But when you take those specific men, people you haven't even spoken to in years, and put their names down on a guest list to witness the most intimate commitment of your current life, that's not a quirky overshare. That's a line, a loud neon boundary that just got stomped on. These weren't her current close friends. They weren't her chosen family or day ones. In fact, she hadn't mentioned them at all before this moment. Some of them were apparently the sons of old family friends. That's it. Nothing meaningful. Nothing that justified handing them front row seats to a sacred vow. And so, when the writer confronted her, when he asked why, it erupted. A fight. A real one. Not petty, not surface level. This wasn't about napkin colors or flower arrangements. This was about respect, about understanding what you're bringing into a marriage, what baggage you're choosing to unload into someone else's life without warning or discussion. And it all ended with a mutual decision. They called off the wedding. Now, pause here. Let's sit in that moment. Calling off a wedding isn't just canceling a party. It's breaking the timeline you thought you were living in. It's unraveling the future you were already picturing. It's a grief, and it hurts. But in this case, maybe it was the kind of pain that reveals truth. Because the truth is, this wasn't about the past, it was about intent, about transparency, about the total lack of emotional awareness it takes to say, yes, I slept with these men in a group setting multiple times, but sure, let's have them over for cake and vows. It's not insecurity that drives the writer's reaction. It's the total absence of foresight from someone he was supposed to trust most. And look, It's one thing if she'd come to him and said, "Hey, this might be awkward, but I'd like to invite them for XYZ reasons." That's a conversation, that's honesty. But she didn't. He found out through someone else, through a random boyfriend. That alone, that's betrayal, not of fidelity, but of openness. The writer isn't a prude. He's not a moral judge on a hill. He's just a man who looked at a guest list and realized this isn't the kind of marriage he wants to step into. Not because of her history, but because of how carelessly she brought it into their present. So is the writer the asshole for walking away? No. He's someone who chose to put self-respect above appearances, who saw the danger of building a foundation on silence and chose to tear it down before it turned to quicksand. In a world that tells men to suck it up, to not make waves, to avoid looking jealous, he stood his ground. And honestly, that's the kind of story people don't talk about enough, because sometimes walking away is the real act of love, love for yourself. Am I the asshole for cutting off my siblings, for forgiving our mother for abusing me? There are stories where pain fades with time, where healing comes quietly, gradually. And then there are stories like this, where the past never really leaves and forgiveness becomes a battlefield. The writer is 29, a husband, a soon-to-be father. But before any of that, he was a little boy, just 8 years old, who lost his father and then lost his safety. The kind of safety every child is supposed to be guaranteed. But instead of love and guidance, he got rage. And not the kind that simmers. No, this was the full-force, white-hot violence of a mother who saw her dead husband in her son and took her grief out on him, piece by piece. While his younger siblings, just 4 and 5 at the time, were spared the beatings, the burn marks, the stabbing forks at the dinner table, the writer was not. He was the one who looked like Dad, the living, breathing reminder of everything she lost, and for some reason, everything she hated. He remembers the words useless, worthless, retarded, words that should never belong in a mother's mouth. And he remembers the blows, the cigarette burns, the endless beatings where she'd scream and spit venom while tearing down a child who was just trying to survive. Imagine being terrified to look at your own mother because she might lash out just for that. It's not just childhood trauma, it's emotional scar tissue layered over bones that never stopped hurting. At 18, he got out, and more than that, he took them with him. The siblings she hadn't abused, the ones she ignored. He didn't just escape, he rescued. He raised them. He supported them through college, gave them a safe home, a chance to grow up without the chaos that destroyed him. So when they told him years later that they'd gotten back in touch with her, that they'd forgiven her, that they were talking about family dinners and baby visits, that wasn't just a sting. That was a dagger. But the writer didn't lash out. Not at first. He just asked for space, for silence. Please don't talk to me about her. That's all. A boundary. Not even revenge. Just peace. But peace wasn't enough for them. They wanted reconciliation, closure, a full circle moment. They wanted him, the one she brutalized, to sit at a table and pretend the past never happened. And then came the sentence that broke it all. We forgave her. She's grown. She's healed. There's no bad blood. Forgiven her for what she did to him. Let's pause right there, because this is the moment that shattered everything. The writer didn't just hear that his siblings forgave their neglectful mother. He heard that they forgave her for his bruises, his trauma, his screams in the dark when no one came to help, and they said it like it was noble, like it was healing. But forgiveness is not a community project. It's not a vote. You can't cast a ballot to pardon someone else's abuser. You can't wrap up someone else's suffering and say, we've decided this doesn't matter anymore. And when he reminded them of that, when he asked how they could possibly have the right, they didn't back down. They told him she needed forgiveness. What about what he needed? What about the child version of him who cried himself to sleep with welts and burns on his body? What about the adult version trying to protect his own child from ever being touched by that darkness? So yes, he cut them off. Not in a petty, vengeful way, but in a way that screamed, you don't get to let that monster back into my life. Not again. Not ever. Not near my child. And they didn't expect it. They thought he'd get over it, that he'd come around. But forgiveness, real forgiveness, is earned, not handed out like party favors. And when the price of their peace is his pain, that's not peace at all. They kept texting, calling, DMing, saying he was unfair, that he was the one making this ugly now. But they missed the point entirely. He's not punishing them. He's protecting himself. Because when you've spent a lifetime crawling out of the pit someone threw you in, you don't go back just because someone else finds it nostalgic. And in the end, this isn't about being petty. This is about finally choosing himself. So, is the writer the asshole? Absolutely not. He's the one person in this entire story who remembered the truth and refused to bury it under someone else's fantasy. And honestly, that kind of strength is heartbreaking and powerful. Am I the asshole for laughing at my stepson and ruining his wedding? Some betrayals don't come with warning signs. They don't arrive with slamming doors or screaming matches. Sometimes they slip in quietly, over dinner, surrounded by people you love, and they shatter something so deeply rooted, you don't even know how to respond. The writer has been married for over 20 years. 20. Not a girlfriend who drifted in and out. Not a temporary fixture. She was there, steadfast, present, raising 5 kids in a blended family. And not as some distant dad's wife figure either. She parented. Adam and Ben, her husband's kids from before, were 5 and 3 when she came into their lives. The rest, Charles, David, and Ellie, grew up with her completely. She's not just a stepmom. She's a mother in every single way that matters. So when Adam, the eldest, announced his engagement, the whole family was overjoyed. Plans were made, roles were given, everyone had a place in the big day. Even Ellie, just 13, was set to be a junior bridesmaid. It was shaping up to be one of those full circle moments, the kind where all the years of sacrifice and love culminate in something joyful. And then it unraveled. At a birthday dinner for the writer's husband, a celebration, Ellie chirps up, bubbling with excitement, talking about shopping for dresses. She even mentions finding a stepmom of the groom dress. Just a sweet, innocent nod to the woman who helped raise her brother. And then, wham! Alice, the fiancée, cuts in. Cold, almost casually cruel. We only need to worry about one dress, Ellie's. That moment, it hung heavy in the air. Everyone went still. And when Ellie, confused, jokes back about a suit, the response lands like a slap. The writer isn't going. We're keeping it limited to only family and close friends. You could feel the blood rush from the room. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't a miscommunication. This was deliberate. And suddenly the wedding wasn't about love. It wasn't about celebration. It was about erasure. Adam had never said a word, not once, not during any of the visits, the dinners, the laughter. And now, he was saying it loud and clear. You're not my mother. You don't belong. It was Charles who broke the silence first. He asked the question everyone was thinking. Was she ever invited at all? Alice confirmed what was already apparent. She never was. Let's just take that in. After 20 years of raising him, loving him, standing by his side, she's being told she's not family, now that it counts. Now that there's an audience, now that there are photos and seating charts, now she's a ghost. And here's where the story burns a little deeper. The younger kids, Charles, David, and Ellie, weren't having it. They stood up. They said what needed to be said, that this wasn't right, that you don't erase someone who helped raise you just because the wedding cake's been ordered. And Adam? He turned to his dad, his real anchor in the storm, and said, well, you could hear the edge in that word, the expectation, the pressure. But the writer's husband? He didn't waver. He looked at his son and said, then I'm not going either. And when Adam finally turned to the writer, demanding to know if she was really going to let everyone ruin his wedding for her, all she could do was laugh. Not mockingly, not spitefully, but the kind of laugh that happens when your heart is breaking and the world feels absurd. And then she left, sat in the car, and wept, because sometimes pain is too big to shout about. Sometimes it's so surreal that the only thing that feels real is your own tears. After that, silence from Adam's siblings, cold calls from extended family, texts calling her a step monster, accusing her of ruining the day. But here's the thing, she didn't ruin anything. She didn't ask to be invited. She didn't beg for a spotlight. She showed up for 2 decades. She parented, she loved, she gave. And when it came time to be acknowledged for any of it, she got discarded like she was just some passing girlfriend who overstayed her welcome. So, is the writer the asshole? Let's not even entertain that. She didn't break this family. She didn't light this match. She was handed the ashes, and all she did was... Am I the asshole for explaining to my future sister-in-law why her kids will never receive anything from us? Sometimes, it's not the shouting matches or the slammed doors that crack a family gathering open. Sometimes it's the quiet tension, the kind that walks in wearing a smile, sits across from you at a holiday dinner, and suddenly demands answers to questions you never thought would need to be asked. The writer, 27, attended Easter dinner with her partner, her brother, and his fiancée, Sarah. Now, on paper, everything looked fine. A normal blended family situation. Cordial, polite, even if not exactly close. Sarah had 2 kids from a previous relationship, an 8-year-old boy and a 6-year-old girl. The kids weren't at the dinner, they were with their father, but their absence didn't stop a storm from breaking out, because Sarah didn't come to celebrate, she came to confront. And what started as Easter dinner quickly turned into a standoff about inheritance, bloodlines, and boundaries. Sarah brought up that the writer's brother, her fiancé, had asked for a prenup. Not uncommon, right? Except she wasn't just concerned about the legal document. She was furious that it included a stipulation. Only biological children would be entitled to the family's inheritance. Her children, children not biologically related to the writer, her brother, or her parents, would be excluded. Now let's pause here. From Sarah's point of view, maybe she imagined a new start. Maybe she thought marriage would automatically rewrite family ties. Maybe she hoped her kids would be accepted fully and without condition. That's not nothing. That kind of hope, it doesn't come from nowhere. But from the writer's perspective, this wasn't about cruelty. It wasn't about favoritism. It was about lineage, legacy, and, frankly, boundaries. Their family had already discussed this topic well before Sarah ever entered the picture. The decision wasn't sudden, it wasn't fueled by malice, it was simply their rule. Only direct descendants would inherit family assets, not stepchildren, not in-laws, just blood. Sarah, though, she saw that as rejection. She called it unfair, said they were treating her and her kids like outsiders, that it wasn't decent to exclude children just because they didn't share DNA. And that's when the writer, calmly but directly, asked the question that stopped everything cold. Will my future children receive anything from your parents or from their biological father's side? Sarah answered honestly, no. And that was the whole point. It wasn't about cruelty, it was about mutual understanding, about how inheritance usually works unless someone decides to break the mold. Sarah wasn't offering anything from her end, and yet she expected full inclusion from theirs. There's something deeply uncomfortable about this kind of conversation. It drags out expectations that usually stay quiet. It forces people to justify choices they hoped would never be questioned out loud. Sarah kept pushing. She wanted answers, clarity, some promise that her children wouldn't be left out. But when clarity was given, she didn't like what she heard. The writer stayed calm for a long while, but she snapped eventually. Because being labeled greedy or cruel just for protecting your family's legacy, that cuts deep. So she told Sarah the raw truth. You're free to work your ass off and leave your own legacy to your children, but don't expect us to make them our financial responsibility. That sentence, no matter how blunt, was the line in the sand. And maybe some people will say it was too harsh. Maybe others will think Sarah had every right to ask. But the truth is, you don't get to marry into a family and rewrite its foundations just because it makes you uncomfortable. The writer didn't explode. She didn't insult the kids. She didn't humiliate anyone in front of a crowd. She simply told Sarah where the family stood and made it clear that she wouldn't be guilted into giving more than she was ever expected to receive herself. And now, she's questioning if she went too far. But here's the thing, the truth isn't always gentle. And sometimes, setting boundaries means being painted as the villain by someone who wanted more than you ever promised. So, is the writer the asshole? Not even close. She didn't shut anyone out. She didn't attack. She just explained the terms. And if Sarah can't live with those terms, well, maybe she needs to ask herself whether she's marrying for love or for something else. Am I the asshole for refusing to cover my tattoos for my boyfriend's family dinner? Some conflicts don't explode out loud. They slip in quietly, disguised as a favor, a suggestion, a little request. Just something to make things easier. But buried underneath is the real message. Can you tone yourself down just this once? The writer, a 21-year-old woman, has tattoos. A lot of them. Some are large, some are bold, and all of them are a part of who she is. Her boyfriend, 26, older, supposedly more mature, had never expressed any issue. He met her this way, dated her this way, loved her supposedly as she was, until dinner with his family came up. Just a casual family get-together. Harmless, right? But then came his request, cloaked in politeness but loaded with implication. Maybe you could wear something with sleeves, just so we don't start any drama. And there it is. Not start any drama. As if the tattoos themselves were walking tabloid headlines. As if her skin, her self-expression, her choices were some form of provocation. He said it was about his grandparents, very old school, he explained. They might not react well. That's when the mask slips. Because what he's really asking isn't small. He's asking her to shrink herself to fit into someone else's comfort zone, to fold her identity into sleeves and silence so strangers won't feel awkward. And when the writer pushed back, not rudely, not aggressively, but with a simple truth, I'm not going to hide part of myself to make your family more comfortable. Suddenly she was the one overreacting. Suddenly she was the one making a scene. He claimed it wasn't about hiding, it was about respect. But what about respect for her? Respect goes both ways. You can't ask someone to present a curated version of themselves and then call it compromise. That's not compromise, that's erasure, however temporary. And then came the final blow. She stood her ground, said she'd go, tattoos and all, nothing outrageous, just herself. He looked at her and said, then don't come. Just like that, an uninvitation because she wouldn't perform the version of herself that made him look better. Let's talk about that for a second. He wasn't trying to protect her. He was trying to manage her. He didn't want to risk his family's disapproval. He didn't want to explain her to them. So instead, he asked her to edit herself. And when she didn't, he removed her from the equation altogether. Now the writer is left wondering, did I overreact? Was I too defensive? But let's be honest here. What exactly was she supposed to do? Say yes, cover up, smile through the discomfort, and make a great impression by pretending to be someone she's not? Also, his grandparents could enjoy their meal uninterrupted? The writer isn't the problem. Her tattoos aren't the problem. The problem is a man who can't reconcile who he dates with who he wants his family to see. This wasn't about dinner. This was a test, and he failed. So, is the writer the asshole for refusing to cover her tattoos? Absolutely not. She didn't make a scene. She didn't disrespect anyone. All she did was refuse to be hidden. And if that's considered a threat to family peace, maybe the peace was never real to begin with. Am I the asshole for being angry that my tax refund paid off my husband's child support? There's a unique kind of betrayal that doesn't come with yelling or slamming doors. It arrives quietly, in numbers on a screen. In this case, a tax refund that never really landed. The writer, who filed taxes jointly with her husband, as many married couples do, was expecting a decent return. After all, they'd done everything right, paperwork filed, numbers tallied, expectations set. But when that deposit hit, only $175 showed up. That was it. Out of what should have been a substantial refund, all they got was pocket change. Confused, the writer dug deeper. And that's when the truth surfaced. $7,000. That's how much her husband owed in back child support. $7,000, not a few missed payments, not a recent slip. This was long-standing debt, hidden, unspoken, and swept under the rug. Let's pause here. Imagine discovering that the money you expected to help with bills, groceries, maybe even some breathing room in a tight budget was gone. Not spent, not misused, just gone. Automatically rerouted to cover a debt you never even knew existed. And now, imagine the person you share a life with, the person you trust enough to file joint taxes with, never told you. That's not just financial betrayal. That's emotional negligence. The writer didn't get an apology. She didn't get understanding. What she got was a man who told her, with a straight face, that she should be grateful. Grateful? He said it was a good thing because now that the child support debt was cleared, he'd be able to contribute more money each month. As if the math magically worked out now, as if the debt disappearing meant the monthly obligations disappeared too. But they didn't. His child is still under 18, the payments continue, the responsibilities haven't vanished. He just used her tax refund, her money, to wipe the slate his name was written on. The writer tried to express how she felt, blindsided, violated, taken advantage of. She was met not with remorse, but with anger. His anger. He wasn't just indifferent, he was upset at her for reacting at all, as if her emotions were inconvenient, as if her confusion and hurt were somehow the real problem. And that kind of gaslighting, it cuts deeper than the financial wound. Because here's the truth. This isn't just about money. It's about trust. It's about being kept in the dark when you're supposed to be a partner. It's about learning that when things got messy, you were never even brought into the conversation. The writer took action. She filed an injured spouse form, a quiet move done through the mail because she couldn't even file it electronically. Just like that, more time, more energy, more effort to clean up a mess she didn't even make. And yet she's left questioning herself. Was I too harsh? Am I overreacting? Let's be clear. She's not the asshole. She's a woman who's picking up the emotional and financial debris from a storm she didn't even see coming. So no, she's not overreacting. She's reacting like a person who was left in the dark, like someone who thought they were in a partnership, only to realize the other person was keeping score in silence. And the worst part, when she finally found her voice, she was punished for using it. That's not just unfair, that's unforgivable. So, is the writer the asshole for being angry her tax refund paid off her husband's child support without her knowledge? Absolutely not. She was never told, never asked, never considered. And now she's the only one acting like an adult. Am I the asshole for telling my in-laws, this is my house, if you don't like my rules, get out? There are moments in life that catch you off guard, not because they're loud or chaotic, but because of how small they are, and yet how deeply they reveal the people around you. This moment started with something so simple, so utterly mundane, a spilled jug of flavored water. That's all it took to set the stage for a storm no one expected. The writer, 25 years old, had just moved into a new house, a milestone worth celebrating. And like any proud new homeowner, he threw a housewarming, friends, his mother, his girlfriend, 27, and her family, food outside, laughter in the air, kids at their own little table. It had all the makings of a peaceful afternoon. Then, an accident. A jug knocked over. The girlfriend's young nephew, just 8 years old, accidentally tipped it. A simple mistake, the kind all kids make. He apologized immediately, visibly upset, clearly remorseful. The writer saw it all. He laughed it off, reassured the boy, and that should have been the end of it. But instead, it escalated. The boy's father swooped in, and what should have been a teachable moment, a quiet, calm reassurance, became something darker. The man scolded his son in front of everyone. Not firm, not fair, but excessive, loud, harsh, embarrassing. And the boy? He ran to the corner of the garden and cried, alone. The writer watched, guilt creeping in. He hadn't stopped it. He hadn't spoken up. But what unfolded next, that was the turning point. When the boy's father returned to the table and relayed what happened, the child's mother, yes, his own mother, sided with the scolding. She said he deserved it, that he should stay over there a long time. There were sniggers from the family, not concern, not compassion, just a cruel little chorus of approval. It was at that point, when the laughter came at a child's expense, that the writer had had enough. He went over to the boy, quietly, gave him a chocolate bar, taught him a silly high five, gave him back a piece of his childhood, just for a moment, and then his mother approached. "Do you mind not talking to my son?" she asked. "He needs to think about what he did wrong, alone, over spilled juice." That was it. That was the moment when the writer pulled the pin. He took both parents aside and, with calm but firm words, reminded them, "This is my house. If you want to treat your child like that, don't do it here. If you don't like my rules, get out." Now, you'd think adults would hear that and reflect, maybe take a breath, but no. They ran back to the table, full of drama, stirring it up for the rest of the family to witness. But then, A surprise ally. The writer's mother spoke up, strong and proud. Didn't I raise a great son? He's right not to let bullies into his home. Cue chaos. The event devolved. Quiet digs, passive-aggressive remarks. The girlfriend, caught between sides, pulled the writer aside and asked, no, pleaded, for him to apologize. And here's where the real conflict sits, because the writer, he stood firm. He refused. In fact, he told her something sharp, maybe too sharp. He said he thought less of her for even asking. Now, that's a heavy line, one that cuts, one that might have consequences. But let's not forget the boy, the one who was actually hurt in all this. Later that day, the writer played ball with him. Another guest joined in, and before they left, the boy, still just 8 years old, walked up and hugged the writer. Not a quick hug, a tight, meaningful one. He said, sorry again, but let's be real, he had nothing to be sorry for. The boy was made to carry the weight of his parents' issues, and the only adult who stepped in to protect him was the one being asked to apologize. So let's ask the real question. Is the writer the asshole for laying down his rules in his own home? Absolutely not. What he did wasn't cruel, it wasn't controlling, it was protective, it was humane, it was a stand against emotional damage disguised as discipline. Let's also not overlook the deeper layers here. The writer's girlfriend didn't just ask for peace, she asked for him to back down, to surrender his values for the sake of family harmony. But what kind of harmony is built on the silence of those who know better? And now he's questioning everything. Would he want to raise a child within a family like that? A family that laughs when a child cries? A family that shames a boy for a mistake and punishes kindness? That's a heavy truth to confront, and an even heavier one to admit. This wasn't just a moment over spilled juice, it was a moment of clarity. So no, he is not the asshole. He's the one adult in the room who remembered what it means to be a decent human being. And if that makes others uncomfortable, maybe it's not him who needs to change. Am I the asshole for eating nuts next to someone with an allergy on a plane? You know, sometimes the most unexpected moral standoffs don't happen on battlefields or in courtrooms. Sometimes they happen midair, crammed in a narrow airplane seat, 30,000 feet above the ocean, with a tiny cup of mixed nuts in hand. This flight, Hawaii to Florida. Long, cramped. You're already tired, probably sunburned, maybe a little dehydrated, and definitely just trying to survive until landing. The writer, like everyone else, just wanted to get through the flight. They hadn't eaten all day, just wanted something to keep the nausea away so they could take their meds. And that's when the mixed nuts arrived. Standard airline fare. A plastic cup of salty relief passed down the rows. Not a feast, but in that moment, it mattered. Then, the turn. A woman seated beside the writer flagged down the flight attendants. Calm, but clearly serious. She said she was allergic to nuts and that the airline should have had a record of this. The system, she claimed, should have prevented this snack service altogether. But the attendants were careful too. They pointed out that in the airline's own form, one she had filled out herself, she had only noted that she couldn't ingest nuts, nothing about an airborne allergy. That right there is a crucial detail. Because an airborne allergy, that's a serious situation. That's a we might need to land the plane level concern. And when asked directly if she needed medical attention or if they needed to make an emergency landing, she said no. So the plane stayed in the air and the nuts stayed in rotation. But then she turned to the writer, not the airline, not the staff, the writer, and asked them not to eat the nuts. Not demanded, not ordered, but asked with an air of expectation. Now pause for a second here, because this is one of those moments that sounds small on the surface, but carries weight. What do you do when someone else's needs directly contradict your own? The writer hadn't eaten yet. Their stomach was empty. They had to take a medication, and eating something, anything, was necessary. So, instead of being confrontational, the writer offered a compromise. They asked, would it be okay if I ate the nuts at the back of the plane and then returned? It was a simple act of diplomacy, a quiet attempt to be decent. And the woman? She rolled her eyes, but said fine. That should have been it, right? A tense moment, navigated, crisis averted. But when the writer returned, the atmosphere had changed. The woman was now complaining to the flight attendants, clearly annoyed, and here's the kicker, referred to the writer as that asshole. Just like that. No acknowledgement of the compromise. No appreciation that the writer stepped away. Just that ugly label thrown in their direction like a rock. And now the writer is left replaying the whole thing, wondering, was I wrong? Could I have handled it better? Let's talk about that. The writer didn't shrug her off, didn't mock her allergy, didn't ignore her request. In fact, they adjusted their own behavior, walked to the back of the plane for a stranger. A stranger who hadn't warned the airline that her allergy could be airborne, and then chose to lash out when things didn't go perfectly. This isn't a case of someone being malicious. This is a case of someone trying their best to juggle empathy and self-care in a setting where both were incredibly limited. And let's be honest, flying is hard. There's no space, no privacy, no room to breathe, literally or metaphorically. You're hungry, you're tired, your choices are boxed in by armrests and tray tables. And sometimes, people expect more from you than you can realistically give. So no, the writer is not the asshole. They didn't act with cruelty. They didn't ignore a real risk. They weren't flippant or just dismissive. They simply chose to take care of their body in the least disruptive way possible. What's most telling is this: the writer still feels bad. Even after all that, still questioning if they could have done more or been gentler. That says more about the writer's character than anything else. Empathy is important, but so is context, and in this case, the writer showed consideration, restraint, and maturity, even when the other party escalated. Sometimes in life, we try to do the right thing and still end up branded the asshole. But that doesn't mean we were wrong. It just means we were caught in one of those gray zones where no choice was perfect. And to be honest, that kind of moral complexity, it's a lot more common than people think. Am I the asshole for publicly bringing up a coworker's divorce and causing her embarrassment? There's this saying, some conversations are better left unfinished. But sometimes you don't know you've crossed that line until the silence that follows is louder than anything you said. This story begins, not in a courtroom or on social media, but around a casual table at work, surrounded by coworkers. Laughter, banter, lighthearted talk. And then, like it always does, the topic veered from casual to personal in the blink of an eye. The writer, 29, had just gotten married the year prior. Naturally, the topic of engagement rings came up, innocently enough. A handful of coworkers, a laid-back moment, nothing heavy, until it wasn't. One coworker, 37, recently divorced, joins in on the conversation. And here's the context. She used to be married to a man who made nearly $1 million a year. Wealth, status, a life that from the outside probably looked enviable, but it didn't last. He left her for someone younger. And while the marriage was gone, she kept the ring, a massive $20,000 diamond, 3 carats, a monument to what once was, and maybe, just maybe, a reminder that she didn't leave that chapter on her terms. Now, the writer shows everyone the ring he got for his wife, a 1.1 carat lab-grown diamond. Affordable, ethical, beautiful. It cost just over $2,000, and his wife loved it. But then came the spark, the moment the tone shifted. The coworker asked how something that big could only cost that little. The writer explained it's a lab diamond. And then, the scoff, the dismissive eye roll, the words that dripped with condescension. Well, mine's a real 3-carat diamond. I'm not into cheap, fake stuff. That stung, and not just because of the words, but because of the way they were said. There's a kind of insult that doesn't need to be loud to land hard. That was one of them. And the writer, well, sometimes when someone throws a jab, you fire back before you even realize what you're doing. So he responded, not cold, not cruel, but sharp. You were married for 3 years, right? So that's like 1 carat per year. Tell the next guy to get you a 40-carat one next time. Boom. Laughter exploded across the group. It was that kind of roast people aren't ready for, the kind that stops time for a second. And while the room laughed, one person didn't. Later, she pulled the writer aside, and that's when the weight hit. She was embarrassed, hurt. She called it rude. And now the writer is left wondering, am I the asshole? Let's take a breath and unpack this. The coworker took a jab first. Let's be honest about that. Dismissing someone's ring, calling it fake and cheap, especially when it's something the writer's wife loves, That's more than just an opinion. It's a passive-aggressive attack dressed as snobbery. But here's where it gets murky. What the coworker said was cold, but what the writer said, it hit deeper, because it wasn't just about the diamond. It was about her failed marriage, about the man who left, about the pain she probably tries not to wear on her sleeve. It exposed a wound she might have thought was hidden, and it did it publicly. Here's the thing. Intent matters, but so does impact. The writer didn't mean to throw salt on old scars, but he did. And now, what started as a flex about a diamond turned into something far more personal. So, is the writer the asshole? Not quite. But maybe a little thoughtless in the moment. And that's human. We've all had that moment where someone says something offhand and our instinct is to snap back, to win the exchange, to make the crowd laugh. But winning a laugh and losing someone's dignity? That's a steep price. At the end of the day, the writer didn't weaponize her pain maliciously. But he did use it as ammo in a verbal duel. Even if he didn't mean to cross a line, he still crossed one. That doesn't make him an asshole. It makes him someone who got caught up in the moment. Someone who probably didn't realize that behind the diamonds and eye rolls was someone still healing. So no, the writer isn't the villain here. But maybe next time, when the claws come out, it's worth asking if the battle is really worth the blow. Because sometimes the hardest thing to wear isn't a cheap ring. It's your past when someone puts it on display for everyone to see. Am I the asshole for not giving my ex-girlfriend any money after we broke up? Let's talk about relationships, the kind where someone gives everything they can, and then the story ends, not with betrayal or chaos, but with silence, with choices, with loss. This isn't a tale of love gone nuclear. This is something quieter, and in many ways, far more complicated. The writer, a 30-year-old man, was in a 2-year relationship with a woman, now 28. Their relationship wasn't marked by cheating, toxicity, or scandal. It ended the way some stories do, with the quiet realization that two people who once fit just don't anymore. But here's where it gets tangled. She had moved across the world to be with the writer, left her home, left her education, left the path she was on. She dropped out of school, uprooted her life, and relocated to the United States, all to be with him. And while they were with him, and while they were together, the writer supported everything: rent, bills, tuition, visa paperwork, even her car lease. She didn't work, not because she was lazy, but because he told her she didn't need to. He was in a good financial place, thanks to a combination of smart investments and inherited wealth. So he paid for everything, and she ran the home. It wasn't an agreement written in legal documents, but it was a shared understanding. His money was their money, while they were together. Fast forward to now. The breakup happened. No animosity, no door-slamming drama. But for her, the loss wasn't just emotional, it was practical. She was in a foreign country, without a degree, without a job, and with nothing to fall back on. And so she asked him for something that, on paper, she's not legally entitled to. A financial settlement. Not because he wronged her, not because he cheated, but because, in her words, I gave up a lot to be with you. I deserve something for the time and sacrifices I made. And the writer? He said no. Now he's asking, am I the asshole? Let's sit in this for a second, because the truth is, there's no clear villain here. No smoking gun. No courtroom, just two people who took a risk. One gave financial security, the other gave up her path. And now the relationship is over, and all that's left is the imbalance of what each person is walking away with. Here's the nuance. The writer didn't ask her to drop out. He didn't beg her to move across the world, but he benefited from it. Her presence, her partnership, her support. She helped build a life together, a life she no longer has access to. So what do we do with that? Was it a transaction? Was love supposed to come with a backup plan? This is the part that gets uncomfortable, because in the eyes of the law, he owes her nothing. They weren't married. There's no legal precedent. But morality, that's not always so black and white, because yes, she made her own decisions, but she made them within a context where she felt safe, supported, loved, and now she's floating, trying to find footing while he gets to move forward financially unscathed. The writer isn't heartless, he feels bad. He says it clearly, he does feel bad that she's struggling, But he also doesn't think guilt should come with a price tag. He believes relationships are about mutual choice, and when they end, not everything can be squared up like a business deal. So is he the asshole? Not necessarily, but this isn't about legality, it's about empathy. The real tension here isn't about who owes what, it's about what love should come with. Should love be enough? Should sacrifices be repaid even after love dies? And here's where we zoom in. She's not asking for a payout from a rich ex-boyfriend she never invested in. She's asking for recognition, for validation, for something that says, I didn't just waste those 2 years of my life, that all she gave up wasn't just a ghost of a memory. And maybe, just maybe, that's what stings most. Not the money, but the feeling that everything she gave now amounts to nothing. Does that mean the writer should pay her? That's a personal decision. But one thing's for sure. Sometimes when we leave a relationship, the emotional debt lingers longer than the love ever did.